Chapter 1. Old paint chipped harmlessly to the floor in the thick, humid air. Wood planks creaked as men leaned in their chairs, glancing toward the open windows and wishing for a breeze that remained undelivered. The lanterns kept the room lit, but just enough for an old town full of drunks. The candelabra flickered tiny dancing shadows across the cards that Clint held in his hand. The deck was old and torn. There was no need to waste coin on new cards. He was sure that some of the men knew what cards he was holding based on their wear. He flicked open his old tin lighter. The flames licked the end of his last cigar and temporarily lit up his face, showing the days of dirt from the road. He inhaled the aroma deeply, enjoying the earthy flavors as he looked down at his hand. He was holding a pair of twos and down to his last few bits of silver. He stared at the 4 remaining faces around the table and pursed his lips. He didn't believe in luck unless it was bad luck, but that never stopped him before, and tonight, in this smelly outhouse of a bar, he did feel lucky. "All in," Clint said, pushing the rest of his silver into the pot, letting the barest hint of a smile brush his lips. "Fold," Hal said. "Fold. I paid your tab enough lately." Kirk groaned. Naz threw his cards down on the table and folded his arms, glaring at Clint. Clint smiled as he saw his bluff roll through the game. "Call," Numbers said, pushing the rest of his silver into the pot. Clint coughed and stared at Numbers. "You sure, soldier? I know your wife has been riding you lately for losing all your milk money." "2 queens," Numbers said, smiling as he laid down his cards. Clint's face hardened as he burned his cigar through his cards and threw them down on the table. "Hey, that's my last deck," Hal protested. Clint's momentary scowl melted as he bit down on his cigar and winked at Hal. "So sorry, gentlemen. I believe I have a previous engagement that I just can't miss." "How are we supposed to keep playing Clint?" Naz said, standing up and moving his coat back, revealing his revolver. "I said I apologize," Clint said, tipping his Stetson. "That was bad form. Next week I'll bring you a new set of cards and the first round's on me." Naz spat into what was left of Clint's beer and snatched his remaining coins before storming off. The rest of the men grumbled as they finished their drinks. They were too drunk to fight anyway. The only one that looked happy was Numbers, as he was sitting pretty with most of the group's coins. Clint turned and walked out into night, hot air and tobacco smoke trailing him as he walked. He sniffed as he heard footsteps behind him. A second later, his gun was in his hands and the trigger cocked back as a dark figure emerged from the alley. "It's me," Numbers said, stopping a few feet shy of Clint. He held a small sack in his hand and tossed it to Clint. "This makes us even," he said, turning and walking away. Clint smiled as he holstered his weapon and opened the sack. The familiar glint of Numbers' winnings for the night shined back at him in the moonlight. Clint tucked the sack into his coat and walked down the street, noticing the various drunks stumbling home, pockets empty and heads swimming with the wonderful effects of cheap booze. The telltale click of a pistol's hammer being cocked back echoed in Clint's ears. "Turn around nice and slow, pretty boy." Clint turned to see 6 inches of steel leveled at his chest. "Naz," Clint said, nodding his head. "I know a scam when I see one. You're not fooling nobody." Naz said, flicking his weapon to indicate that Clint needed to give up his ill-gotten gain. "Naz," Clint said, "I haven't killed anyone this week, and I don't need the law coming down on me." "I got no reason to keep things civil, not unless you pass me back what you took from me," Naz said, tightening his grip on his Colt. Clint shrugged and slowly reached into his coat, removing the sack of coins. He whipped them straight at Naz, who fired. Lead whizzed past Clint, singing through the air as another shot rang out through the street. Naz went down, and Clint turned his head toward the sound of the second shot. "Saved you again, darling," Artemis said, cocking her repeating rifle to chamber a new round. The spent shell casing sailed through air, catching a small glint of moonlight before clinking across the ground. "Darling," Clint said in an incredulous tone. "Now you know I can take care of myself," he said, snatching up the bag of coins. Artemis was tall and slender, her golden hair shining in the moonlight. She had those brilliant blue eyes that drove men crazy. She was more than pretty, but more than that, she was deadly with a rifle in her hands. "I think it's high time we left this one-horse town," Clint said as several men exited the building to see what the commotion was all about. "Where's Tristan?" Artemis asked, as the two of them ran back toward the ranch. "Hell if I know," Clint said, huffing. "You check the brothel." Artemis stared daggers into Clint. He knew how she felt about the brothels. She was always getting whistled at and pinched every time they went near one, and nothing irritated her more than breaking the wrists of grabby drunks. "You grab the drunk, I'll grab our gear. We got the horses stashed a mile west outside of town." "You expect me to run a mile?" Clint said angrily. "I'm not the one who's running us out of here, remember?" she said accusingly. Clint flashed a smile at her, and she huffed as she tripped him. He fell skidding across the ground, whipping up clouds of dirt. He sat up and pushed his dark hair back out of his face. Artemis bent down and picked his Stetson off the ground, tossing it back at him. "Whoops, sorry, darling," Artemis said sarcastically. "You know where to find me." She took off running down a side street. Clint dusted himself off a crooked smile spreading across lips. He was a handsome man, and yet he never felt like he could get a leg up on Artemis. She was probably the only woman he'd ever met that wasn't falling all over him by the end of the night. But considering where he'd freed her, it wasn't a big surprise. "What a gal," he said before diving behind a horse trough. A band of rough-looking men rounded the corner, sounding like a pack of stampeding horses. Clint noticed the rough-looking men that Naz was known to run with. "He went this way," one shouted as they ran down the street. "Damn it, Naz, we were getting so close." Clint cursed to himself. He reached to his side and ran his finger across the bone hilt of the Colt Peacemaker he had holstered. He always carried it with him, but he preferred not to use it. "Some guns are just too good for this bad old world," he said, taking off down the street back the way he came. Clint stopped outside Lucy's brothel. He tipped his hat and strode in the familiar stench of sweat and alcohol wafted over him as a busty girl greeted him at the door. "Hello, stranger. Can I get you a drink?" the girl asked, batting her eyes at him. He flashed her his best roguish grin. "Whiskey, darling, and point me in the direction of the grumpiest, angriest, dirtiest man in here." She rolled her eyes and pointed to a dark figure drinking at the bar. Several stools on either side of him remained vacant despite the lack of proper seating. Clint made his way over to the bar, plopping down next to his friend. "I see you've been making new friends with your wonderful personality," Clint said mockingly. "He's here," Tristan said, downing the rest of his bourbon. Clint stopped stunned. Well, I've finally found something that'll shut you up," Tristan said darkly. "You sure?" Clint asked softly. "I'll never forget that face, I'm sure." "The heat is coming down on us fast. We may need to leave and catch up with him another day." Tristan slammed his glass down on the bar, shattering it. Several patrons glanced over and turned back to their conversations. "I'm not leaving here without his head unless it's in a cedar box," Tristan said, blinking his eyes. Clint stared at him appraisingly. "Can you shoot straight?" "How dare you ask me that?" Tristan said, hanging his head. "The mage that killed my wife is upstairs with some whore, and you want to know if I'm drunk." He spat. "Don't lie to me, Trist," Clint said in a tone that broke no argument. "Can you shoot straight?" Tristan turned back to the bar. "No," he said coldly. "Did you bring it?" Clint asked. Tristan laughed. "I may be the biggest arse on God's green earth, but the day I turn stupid, you can put a pair of bullets in my chest." Clint looked up at the second-floor rooms. He suddenly saw the whole building differently. He marked exits and paths through the crowd of drunks, seeing what would happen when all hell broke loose. "What's the plan?" Clint asked. Tristan snorted. "I figured I'd just wait for him to stroll out and take him." Clint narrowed his eyes. "He's a slider, Trist." "I know," Tristan said, slamming his fist down on the bar. "I would have had him in Shamray had I known then." This particular mage could teleport a short distance, and he had the habit of jumping the second he heard any gunshot, regardless if it was pointed at him. Plus, he could control lightning. That made him deadly. The ability to appear behind your enemy and burn them from the inside out made him one of the more terrifying mages in existence. He had a knack for killing girls and then wiping out any law enforcement that came after him when he got bored. He loved killing men that he thought were hunting him, almost as much as he liked killing girls. "We gotta flush him out, Trist. Which one of us is going in there?" Tristan sighed, getting to his feet. "I'm going in. I won't be able to hit him unless I'm at close range. You can pick him off when he slides out of the room." Tristan turned to look at his friend. The crow's feet were more pronounced than usual on his weathered face. There was so much dirt on him that it was hard to see the salt and pepper in his hair. Tristan was built and could take almost any man in a fistfight, drunk or not. But these past few years, Clint had seen much of the light go out of his friend's eyes. "I'll hit him, but you'll finish him," Clint said, sliding his Colt out of its holster. After checking to see that it was loaded, he snapped the cylinder shut and nodded to his friend. The hostess that greeted Clint when he came in finally showed up with his whiskey. She shook her head when she thought she saw a flash of green light. Before she could ask anything, Clint leaned in to whisper in her ear. At first, she shook her head when he pointed to Tristan, and then Clint dropped a stack of silver coins on her tray. She smiled, placing the coins in her dress, and slid an arm around Tristan, moving him toward the second-floor rooms. Once they got past the bodyguards and onto the second-floor balcony, Tristan sent the girl into their designated room alone. She was all too happy to oblige. Tristan strode down and stared at the door he'd seen the man go in. It was hand-carved from old rosewood, the red veins twisting through the oiled, grainy wood. Funny how the brothels are always better maintained than the city hall. Tristan thought darkly. Guess it's fair, brothel girls work a lot harder than government officials. He shook his head to bring his vision into focus. His cheeks were hot, and he could feel his hand shaking. Gripping the hilt of his pistol, he slammed his shoulder hard into the door, splintering the wood where the hinges tore out of the frame. Tristan stumbled into the room and fired his pistol as he fell to the floor. He heard people start yelling as the bodyguards rushed up the stairs. His head drifted up slowly to see Raven standing over a brothel girl bound to the bed. He was fully dressed and holding a long silver rapier against the girl's throat. Just then, 2 bodyguards burst into the room. "Evening, gentlemen," Ravon said, pressing the tip of his rapier into the girl's throat. She screamed against the gag in her mouth, arching her neck back as far as she could away from the sword. One man aimed a pistol at Raven as the other aimed his at Tristan. They were obviously well-trained and knew how to work together. "I think that you ought to leave us alone before things get messy," Raven said, eyes full of delight. Neither bodyguard moved an inch. "Get out!" Tristan breathed as the Raven blinked out of existence, appearing behind the first bodyguard, his rapier jutting out the man's gut. The second bodyguard turned and fired a shot into nothing as Raven appeared on the other side of him, sliding his rapier through the man's eye before vanishing. He twitched unnaturally and slumped to the ground, spilling blood onto the floor. The girl screamed against her gag and tried to get free of her bonds. Tears streamed down her face as Ravon appeared back in front of her, pressing his rapier back against her throat. "Now, where were we?" Ravon said, turning his attention back to Tristan. "Ah, yes, you've been following me lately and spoiling all of my fun." Tristan said nothing as he gripped his gun harder. "Don't I know you?" Ravon asked, cocking his head to the side. "Where do I know you from?" Tristan spoke through clenched teeth. "Milheim." "Milheim?" Ravon asked questioningly. 11 years ago." Tristan spat. "You killed my wife and unborn son." Ravon smiled. "And you've been following me for 11 years. Oh, I like that," he said, pulling his rapier away from the girl's throat. Electricity crackled as he ran his fingers along the blade. "I like that a lot," he said, shuddering with pleasure. Tristan flipped his gun up, pulling the trigger. Wood exploded, showering him with splinters as the mage dissolved into nothing. Tristan turned around, expecting to be run through, but saw nothing. He heard a gunshot go off in the main room and stumbled out of the door, ramming his body hard against the railing that encircled the balcony. He stared down as he saw Clint level his pistol at the mage. As the shot went off, he saw the mage disappear and reappear behind Clint. Tristan shot wide to the left, but the shot triggered the mage's paranoid reflex, and he teleported away. Clint turned around, scanning the room, looking for the mage, but he was nowhere to be seen. "The alley!" Tristan yelled down at Clint. Clint looked up for a brief moment and dashed out of the building. Tristan dropped his gun and slumped down against the handrail. The alcohol was making his head feel thick and his vision fuzzed. As he blinked, trying to bring the world back into focus, Ravon materialized in front of him. "You know who has my soul, don't you?" Ravon stated. "Is it you?" he asked. "Why don't you just kill me and get it over with?" Tristan spat. "Because," Ravon said, yawning. "I'm bored, and you can't kill what you can't hit. I've killed mages before. Your power isn't infinite, and one time you'll reach for the power and it won't be there, like a parched man crawling in the desert sand. I just have to wear you down, but I'll make sure that you taste ashes before you die. Once I reclaim my soul, I'll come for you, and I'll make you wish you'd never been born. But until that day, you and I are going to have barrels of fun together," he said, laughing, as his form flashed out of existence. Tristan heard the muffled screaming from inside the room, grabbing his pistol as he dashed back into the room. The smell of burned flesh stung his nose as the electrocuted corpse of the girl lay smoking on the bed. "Damn it," Tristan said as he slid his gun back into its holster. "Damn him, and damn me." He walked down to the bar and snatched the cheapest bottle of scotch he could find and started his way back to camp. Clint dashed behind a building as a group of constables ran past him toward the brothel. "Time to get gone," Clint said as he ran towards the edge of town. "Sorry, Trist, I lost him." He looked back as he heard the sound of men following. "Split up!" they shouted as Clint dodged down a side street. The sound of a ricocheting bullet forced Clint to stop dead in his tracks. Another shot rang out as Clint's hand inched toward his pistol. "That's far enough," a voice called out. "Let's see him." Clint raised his hands very slowly and turned around to see the local sheriff holding a repeating rifle. "I done nothing wrong, lawman. Ask anyone," Clint said. "I don't know about that. Turns out someone shot up Lucy's, and everyone round here knows better than that. Way I see it, you're spending some time in the clink till restitution can be made." Clint's lip curled. "You're looking for a mage. He's the one responsible." "There ain't no mages in Willow Bend. Show me your gun. If it ain't been fired, then you're free to go." Clint cursed softly. He didn't want to spend the night in jail. He hated the smell of urine-soaked sheets. "What's it gonna cost me?" Clint said through gritted teeth. "You think you can shoot up a brothel and we're just gonna let you go for a little coin?" the sheriff asked. Clint sighed and reached very slowly into his pocket, revealing the sack of silver coins. Staring at it, Clint tossed it a few feet short of the constable and put his hand back up into the air. The sheriff bent down and opened the sack. His eyes went wide and a smile crossed his lips as he greedily tucked the coins into his coat. "You and your kind gotta leave Willow Bend tonight and don't come back here." "Are we square?" Clint asked. The sheriff paused and nodded, turning and walking back toward the brothel. "Classy," Clint said, tipping his hat. He sighed as he turned. "I hate walking." He muttered as he started the mile trek back to camp. Clint pressed his back against one of the many orange maple trees that grow in clumps outside of Willow Bend as he sank to the ground. The terrain was littered with maple trees and soft shrubs that provided the town with plenty of hunting grounds. Not to mention that the orange leaves gave the place the perpetual look of autumn. Willow Bend sat smack in the middle of two trade routes that caravans often took. Rumors were that they were slotted for one of the next rail lines. Steam engines were a relatively new discovery and already were changing the landscape of the southern continent as more and more rail lines filtered in from the north. Sliding off his boots, Clint emptied several small pebbles into the grass growing just off the trail. "Give me a good horse any day," Clint thought to himself. To him, most machines were just a stone's throw from magic, and he hated magic. "Well, sometimes," he thought, stroking the hilt of his colt. Sighing, he slid his boots back on and once again huffed toward the campsite. It wasn't long before he could smell something wonderful wafting through the crisp night air. There was no mistaking the distinct aroma of one of Ramsa's exotic stews. Clint veered off the path and soon saw the light of a campfire through the trees. The light bounced through the orange leaves and made them dance like they were on fire as Clint heard the familiar sound of laughter. "Well, I'm glad to see that you decided to wait for me," Clint said, stepping into the camp. A huge round man stood in front of a pot, stirring in some herbs. His long dark hair flowed into his long thick beard, which held several strands of beads woven in colourful patterns against his dark skin. Ramsa was probably the largest man Clint had ever seen close up. Despite the layers of fat that enveloped him, he was strong as an ox, strong as a big ox. He, I heard that Artie had to pull your butt out of the chicken coop again," Ramsa said in his deep, scratchy voice. "That's not how I remember it," Clint said, plopping down on a log set by the fire. "Oh, they say that the memory goes as the body slows with age," Ramsa said, chuckling. "Looks like you better start whittling." "Whittling?" Clint asked, cocking an eyebrow in confusion. "Either that or gardening. Isn't that what you old-timers do?" Ramsa teased. "The way I remember it, you're at least a decade older than me." Clint shot back a little too defensively. "Yeah, but I keep myself in good shape," he said, shaking his belly. "You know what they say, strong body, healthy mind." Artemis snorted, covering her mouth as she tried to stifle a laugh. "Now, boys, let's not get out of hand. After all, we got to get some good sleep tonight. We've got a long day tomorrow." Clint stared at her. "You got somewhere to be, Angel?" he asked. "Don't tell me you've forgotten about going after Silas," she said, gasping and putting a hand to her breast as she looked over at Ramsa. "I didn't want to admit it, but you may be right, Ramsa. I think he's gone and gotten old on us." That caused Clint to sit up with a jerk. "You mean you found him? How?" Clint asked, eyes glinting wildly in the firelight. "Oh, honey," Artemis said as she wrapped her lips around a spoonful of stew. She paused deliberately, pretending to savour the bite. Well, half pretending. "You know we girls have our ways." Clint's face flushed a little as he cleared his throat. "But you did find out where he's gone off to." "Oh, please, Artie, let me tell him. Please," Ramsa begged with childlike glee in his voice. "Oh, All right, Artemis said. I never could resist such a big, strong man, she said, winking. Ramza turned, grinning so big you could see all of his teeth, which stood out in stark contrast to his dark beard. Ramza paused, savouring the moment. It's in Chaiten. Ah ha 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 ha, he said as he fell back onto his stool, laughter echoing through the trees. Clint's face turned up in a sour expression. You're not serious, he said, looking at Artemis. She was chuckling too, obviously trying very hard not to burst out like Ramza. I'm afraid so, she said, regaining her composure. I'm afraid we're headed to Silver City herself. Clint looked like he was going to be sick. Figures, the only thing I hate more than mages are monkeys. By Callias's beard, I hate those dirty, stinking, annoying monkeys. Ramza rubbed a tear from his eye as he sat up. Ah, don't worry, Clint. Just don't let 'em throw that monkey mud at you, like last time, he said as he struggled to suppress another fit of laughter. Artemis choked on a spoonful of stew as she began laughing too. Oh man, this is going to be great, Ramza said. Hey, where's Trist? Even old Grumps is going to get a kick out of this one. Clint was silent for a full few seconds before answering. We ran into Ravon, he said, clinching so as not to let any emotion in his voice. Both of his companions stopped laughing and froze. Why didn't you say anything, Izzy? Artemis asked hesitantly. Trist's alive, but Ravon got away. Do you have it safe? Clint asked, turning to Ramza. It's safe, Ramza said, pausing for a moment. Is he coming back tonight? I don't know, Clint said. As he got up, he grabbed a bowl of the stew. I doubt it. I'll stay up and keep a lookout for him, Ramza said. You two should get some sleep. Silver City is a few weeks' ride from here. We'll get going as soon as Tristan gets back. Clint nodded as he took a big bite of stew. The sweet meat made him smile. You know, Ramza, I don't know how we ever got along without you. Ramza flashed a big grin. As long as you keep the company of pretty girls like Artie here, you won't be getting rid of me any time soon. Oh, Ramza, Artemis said. When are you going to teach the rest of these boys how to properly treat a lady? Sorry, Artie, can't be done. They're just too stupid. But that's okay. Some of my favorite people are stupid, he said, chuckling as he went back to stirring the stew, occasionally tasting it to make sure the spices were right.